This is looking at the character of Atticus in To Kill a Mockingbird. And this isn't pretending to be a full character analysis of Atticus. What it is taking two extracts and looking at those extracts and then sort of some wider ideas about Atticus. And it's also going to be used as a basis for letting you know how to think about planning an essay. So what I'd start with doing is you've got a question like, how does Lee present Atticus in these two extracts and in the rest of the novel? And I'd come up with a theory of Atticus in the same way that when you're studying a text, I'd come up with your theory, your take on each character. That'll give you an idea of what to revise for any exams and how to come up with a hypothesis for your essay. So a good essay needs a theory. Right? And everything that you're writing should go to support or elaborate on that theory. So you need to make some notes about how you see the character from your study so far. And I've done that to kind of start off with, to sort of try and get my thoughts in order. So I want to bear in mind that Atticus, for me, is a symbol of fairness, equality and justice, especially when things are difficult to deal with, when things are going wrong. I mean, if you remember that quotation where he says, this time we aren't fighting the Yankees, we're fighting our friends. But remember this, no matter how bitter things get, they're still our friends and this is still our home. So no matter how difficult things are, he keeps a sense of fairness and perspective and proportionality. I also want to think about the idea of appearance and reality, because one of the characters says, Atticus Finch is the same on the street as he is at home. There's no discrepancy with Atticus. Some of the other characters, you get the feeling, are putting on a front, are putting on a facade, whereas Atticus seems to be very honest. He is the same with his children as he is with his clients, as he is with the people in the community. And that idea is just one to hang on to slightly for the Tim Johnson extract, because that's maybe a time when you could argue that there's a difference between appearance and reality with Atticus. But I'd also kind of say that leads into our next point here, that obviously we have to bear in mind that Harper Lee is using Scout as a narrative vehicle for telling the story. And in the narrative voice of Scout, we have this combination of the childlike voice, or the childhood memory, and also the hindsight of the adult, which contributes a lot to the kind of wry, and you'd spell wry like that, that's a W, a wry tone as it's going through, the kind of slight cynicism or the slight worldly wise nature of Scout is added in to her naive or childlike narrative. So it's this strange kind of combination. And actually, when you look in a moment at the Tim Johnson section, that's all to do with the fact that Atticus is honest to himself. Atticus is completely the same, but it's Scout who's put this idea of him being, feeble, him being weak, him being dull, over the top of what he's really about because of her own youth. I also might want to make a point that Atticus is the moral centre of the novel. Not only does he stand firmly by his own principles, but he is the reason why the children are able to do that as well, despite all of the difficulties that Tom Robinson's trial and ordeal and death bring. He is the reason why Scout is able to emerge more compassionate rather than being damaged or traumatised by it all, and why Jem has that burning sense of justice about him that allows him to feel kind of Tom Robinson's death so deeply, but also for him to maintain his principles. Atticus is a kind of symbol of dignity and honesty. He's never anything less than honest with the children. When Scout is complaining to Uncle Jack that he didn't treat her fairly, she says that Atticus always listens to both sides. And that is both his professional and his personal reputation, that he deals with everybody straightforwardly and honestly. Now, does he have some faults? Well, he may well do. He doesn't take Bob Yule's threats. He doesn't take the depth of Bob Yule's embarrassment or hatred seriously, and therefore arguably he almost fails to protect his family from Bob Yule's attack at the end of the novel. And he certainly suffers from kind of self-doubt in the way that sensitive people do. They worry that they're doing the right thing. So he's not perfect, he's not arrogant. He is actually kind of more psychologically rounded and human. So looking first of all at this extract from chapter 10, and we're aware very much that this is an extract where the values of the children are implicitly compared or are juxtaposed against the values of the adults. This idea of Bildungsroman, this kind of term here, is a term for a narrative which shows a character growing up. It's a coming of age novel, and in a lot of ways this is a Bildungsroman because Scout is growing up. This is a kind of summer that really not quite robs Scout of her innocence, but certainly opens her eyes to the ways of the world. And here, you get the idea of Scout's idea of Atticus versus the implied idea of Atticus. Reading this, we can kind of say, hang on, he's not old, he's not feeble, he's not, dull. But we've got to measure it through Scout's ideas. So Scout, straight away, this idea of he was nearly 50, she equates age with infirmity, not with wisdom. And that's important because it really is something that she has to grow up and realise that things aren't perfect, and actually sometimes imperfect things are better. So the idea that she doesn't see that actually being nearly 50 is an asset rather than a disadvantage. And this carries on in terms of it reflected upon his abilities and manliness. She wants a father who is the archetypal, that's the kind of perfect example, an I've got to spell it correctly first, archetypal, so a typical strong young man, and she gets Atticus instead. But in a way, Atticus, one of his purposes in the novel is to show that actually being a good man, being a source of true strength, and maybe the perceptions of masculinity that come from that is includes kind of ideas of justice and fairness and tolerance and dignity. So she wants to be able to boast about him and talk about him, but she can't talk about him in the same way that her friends do. And he's clearly an involved father. He's never too tired to play keep away, but he doesn't want to kind of be tackled. So he is involved in the children's lives, both physically and morally. He's present as a father, even more impressive because he's a single father, and obviously he's trying to keep his job going as well. Scout's view as her father didn't do anything is very overly simplistic, and is that kind of short-sighted child's view of the world. It's her innocence and naivety. It's ironic that she lists the things that he could have done that would have been attractive to her. He's not the sheriff, he doesn't farm, work in a garage, or do anything to cause anyone to admire him. Atticus becomes a divisive figure. He actually divides the community because some people do think he's doing really well in defending Tom Robinson, and those other kind of prejudiced members of the community are turning against him because of his principles. So he arouses both strong admiration and strong condemnation as he moves through the novel. So in the community, he's a divisive figure. She also matches physical failings with weakness, whereas there is this much bigger question of moral failings and physical failings. Yes, Atticus may have difficulty seeing out of one eye, but his perception, his metaphorical sight, is much better than all of those younger fathers, say the Cunningham father, who really gets involved with that mob and goes to the jail to look at possibly lynching Tom Robinson. Atticus is an intellect rather than a physical strength. When other people's fathers are showing their physical prowess, their physical power, She says he sat in the living room and read. And this whole section from Scout is a series of things that she doesn't appreciate. She is still young enough to kind of want the glamour and the physical strength. She doesn't appreciate fully the impact of intellect, quiet dignity, and thoughtfulness, and being perceptive. So she lists the things that he's not in longer sentences, and is very blunt about the things that he is in shorter sentences. You talk about the problems that the Tom Robinson trial brings to the family, and then moves on to this idea of wouldn't teach us to shoot. And the implication is, if you're reading Scout's narrative, that Atticus either isn't skilled enough, isn't interested enough, isn't violent enough, isn't powerful enough, all of those things relating to kind of all these claims here. It's like, well, of course this kind of bookish, quiet man isn't going to be interested in guns or isn't going to be able to shoot. And so hold that thought for the Tim Johnson episode. So Atticus wasn't interested in guns and wouldn't teach us to shoot, right? Uncle Jack has to step in and what is that? Okay, well, we come to, just moving up a little bit, I can do that. They've updated this programme since I last used it, and it's got all these new features on it. Okay, so Atticus, when they get the gun, says, I'd rather you shot at tin cans, but I know you'll go after birds. And that's the idea of his idealism coming up against his realism. Okay, and that's a very difficult balance that Atticus embodies, really. Idealistically, he likes to think his children won't kill things with the guns, but really he knows they will. And that becomes a kind of metaphor for how he treats people in the community. He knows what the Ewells are like. He knows what the Cunninghams are like. And so he takes the kind of sensible steps most of the time to deal with that. And this idea of it's a sin to kill a mockingbird is explained by Miss Maudie, and it becomes kind of that theme of the book, and is indeed its title, the kind of the people who are too innocent, the people who are too good, who are not doing anybody else any harm. Please leave them alone. Don't damage them any further. It's also just interesting just to kind of, I've just seen on that note I've made this morality and religious pronouncement. He's not an overly religious man, he's not proselytizing, not kind of pushing religion all the time like some of the characters who are far less moral, are actually far more dubious, or trying to claim that they're far more religious, or far more morally dubious. That's a better way of putting it. Whereas Atticus is really clear that, this damage to those who really are innocent is not something that he wants his children doing. Okay, we move on to the second extract, which is later on. It's the Tim Johnson one. It's the rabied dog. Tim Johnson is a dog that's got rabies coming up the road. And in terms of your context, this is a very real threat. A rabid dog would be a death sentence to anyone it bit. And the dog is certainly going to die. There is no criticism of Atticus at all for shooting the dog. The dog is not curable. The dog is terminal at this point. And the chance is that it's going to take someone else with it if it attacks somebody, because it will have been turned mad by the rabies. And again, you get this juxtaposition of the adult's view of Atticus. So Mr. Tate saying, take him, Mr. Finch. Those short, clear, unambiguous monosyllables, the imperative, this is, handing over to Atticus. Atticus can do the job. It's done and dusted. Jem and I nearly fainted. Okay, because all of a sudden, their bookish kind of dad who does nothing but read in the living room is being given this gun. And Atticus is modest, don't waste time, go on. He either modest or, that self-doubt coming in again. But, they know this is a one-shot job. And as Jem and Scout watch, they are in a fog, so metaphorically in a fog. They do not know what's happening. This is a point, we were talking about appearance and reality, where their perception of Atticus is completely different from the reality of Atticus. Every other adult in this scene knows about one-shot Finch. Okay, that is pretty clear that Atticus and his shooting prowess is known to the adults. It's not known to Jem and Scout. And so, Atticus and his honesty and his appearance and reality is completely correct. It's Scout's perception of reality that's wrong. And that's what puts her in a fog, because these worlds all of a sudden don't make sense. Why would somebody hand her father this gun? She thinks he moves like an underwater swimmer, and time had slowed to a nauseating crawl. So you've got that simile there and the metaphor. And she is imbuing that situation with a jeopardy that it doesn't have. Scout's perception of it is, oh my goodness, my father is going to completely mess up. Why would anyone give Atticus this gun? This is awful. What is going to unfold here? Atticus' own kind of movements, he may be slowed, he may be kind of contemplative, he may be moving like an underwater swimmer, but his reasons would be entirely different. He would be weighing up and thinking and measuring and preparing psychologically for what he's about to do. You have the moment of kind of tension. He pushes his glasses up, slipped down, dropped into the street, and they crack. That idea that, he's human, he's fallible. He's not one of these ideal fathers, or superficially ideal fathers that Scout was talking about, driving a truck or being all strong. He's not striding out with this gun in his hand. He drops his glasses, they shatter on the grass. Oh no, he's not going to be able to even see the dog. So there's this kind of conflict, this dichotomy, that tension. Dichotomy is that kind of the tension where it pulls between each other of what Scout's expecting and what happens. And we have kind of quite, there's the onomatopoeia and there's the monosyllables of this as it's starting to, prepare. And all of a sudden, the yanked a ball tip lever as he brought his gun, the rifle cracked. Tim Johnson leapt, flopped over, crumpled. He didn't know what had hit him. It's that humanity to it. It is a kind of compassionate way of dispatching the dog. Atticus hits him, pretty much exactly, albeit a little bit to the right. But, he dispatches the dog quickly and as painlessly as it can be done. And he's skillful. He has got that precision to it. And everybody else has full confidence in Atticus. Hecate says, you were a little to the right. And it's a kind of like look what you just did. You're a little bit off, but just did the job. He's gently kind of teasing him almost. And Atticus always was, again, shows his familiarity and his kind of skill and quiet confidence. He kind of grinds his glasses or the lens kind of to make sure it's not dangerous anymore. He kind of powders it. And then they go and look at the dog, leaving, obviously, the neighbourhood, coming back, having seen this. And Jem, this metaphorically kind of being paralysed, he cannot believe that his father's just done this. Scout has to pinch him. And this renders him pretty much inarticulate. He can't reply, he can't speak. He's got all of these questions and all of these kind of assumptions that have been blown out of the water, but he can't say anything. Okay, so this nothing at the end is just Jem and by extension Scout coming to terms with this new reality that actually everybody else knows their father as one-shot Finch from a time before they were born, but actually he's still their dad. He's giving, just normal paternal advice. Don't go near the dog, do this, don't do that. And the children have to reevaluate their views of Atticus. And it is the one of the starts, if you like, of that process of Scout and Jem coming to terms with what their father is, what he represents, what he's prepared to do, and the implications for them, their family and their community. So when you're writing this, I'd start looking at that detail of the reference to the story, But I'd also start looking at your theory of Atticus using those, maybe some of those bullet points that were on the opening page. Hope that helps. Bye now.